Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Change underway in Syria. NBC's Raf Sanchez is on the Golan Heights border reporting on the group that toppled the 50-year reign of the al-Assad family.
In some ways, this is kind of an interesting experimental rerun of the Arab Spring from 2011.
What it tells us about the balance of power globally with Council on Foreign Relations President Michael Froman.
It's a big loss for Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, the three parties who are really propping up the Assad regime. And it demonstrates their weakened state, their weakened capability of supporting them.
And a fatal shooting of a health insurance executive has exposed public anger at corporate leaders.
It could be generic. Anyone who gets paid $20 million a year, you could be mad at, I guess.
The Partnership for New York's head, Kathy Wylde, she manages a collective of private sector CEOs and execs, joins us on the threats.
Nobody wants to feel this vulnerable.
Plus, TikTok is one step closer to being banned in the U.S., and the Mets scoring a 15-year contract with Juan Soto, and it'll only cost him $765 million.
Sometimes big contracts pay off, sometimes they don't.
All that and much more today. It's Monday, December 9th, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Happy Monday, happy new week to you.
Meantime, President-elect Trump speaking to Kristen Welker on NBC's Meet the Press over the weekend, and Eamon Javers joins us with the latest on all of it. A lot of news made, Eamon.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. A fascinating conversation between President-elect Trump and Kristen Welker of NBC on Meet the Press. I think we should start with what he said about the Federal Reserve, because this was such an interesting answer. Welker asked him for his reaction to Jay Powell's suggestion that, he would not step down if Donald Trump asked him to step down, asserting the Fed's independence. Here's what Trump had to say about that. Take a listen.
Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said he will not leave his post even if you ask him to. Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it. But I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
You don't have plans to do that right now?
No, I don't.
So there you see the former president saying he's really asserting that he's got the authority to push Jay Powell out of office, saying if I told him to go, I think he would. Remember, that's the opposite of what Jay Powell said. He said that if he was asked to go, he would not go. Trump saying, well, if I asked him, he wouldn't leave. If I told him to, that is, gave him an order, he would leave. So the former president here asserting that he has the power to push the Federal Reserve chair out, but not saying necessarily that he's going to do that anytime soon, guys. So a fascinating conversation here about executive authority and the Fed, and we'll see where all of that lands after Inauguration Day next year. Back to you.
Thanks, Eamon. It was a fascinating interview.
It was like an hour and 16 minutes.
Right. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Joe. You've known the president a long time. Yeah. What did you think of that answer when he said that if he ordered him to, he would? I'm not sure he would. But I didn't understand what was going on there.
I think he was.
What was the nuance?
I think he was saying that, well, we'll see. At this point.
I think he was preserving his options.
Exactly.
Like it sounded like I'm not going to get committed into anything or say something that I then have to reverse myself on.
Right. There's a whole bunch of answers like that where he gave an answer saying, in fact, he used Joe Biden as the example. He said, I don't want to be Joe Biden as it related to the pardons. Right. So I don't want to commit to this because I may want to do this.
If I change my mind down the road. Right. I was amazed at how much ground they covered, how long he sat and talked through all of these things. I mean, that was an extensive interview. And he thought through a lot of things. I don't know if you heard his answer on minimum wage, where she kind of pushed him and said, in these 19 states where they voted for you, would you raise it? He gave a very nuanced and thoughtful answer on it. He said, look, if you look in California where they've raised it, they have restaurants that are going out of business, that he would talk to the governors because it does seem like a low level. But he also said there's a real difference in cost of living when you look at a Mississippi or an Alabama versus a New York and California. It was just pretty thoughtful conversation the whole way around.
He'll probably do, he'll probably do what in my view would be a lot of good things, but I'm worried about the economy and the stock market. So just in terms of
how high we are right now.
valuations, how far it's come.
Well, did you see there was a JP Morgan analyst over the weekend who said that the Trump trade had sort of petered out? That was
all trades might peter out. What was the S&P up this year? It's 28% or something.
Yeah,
up the year before.
Year to date. I mean, it's
valuations
hit a new
are high
every day, so it's hard to keep track of it. But
we were
year
supposed
to
to have a
date,
recession
32%. Well, that's 1 year. What's the year to date?
2 years ago, we were supposed to have a recession. So
yeah,
business cycle's not conquered, obviously, and the Fed has. We'll see whether they really did. Very difficult needle to thread through. And so far, hopefully it is a soft landing, everything works, but they were at zero for a long time, and a lot of bad things can happen if you do that. And we've talked about that 40-year bull market in bonds, and the worst we get is a move up to, 5% on Fed funds. Hopefully it all happens, but I'd much rather come into. If I was worried about a legacy, I'd much rather come into a market trading at about 14 times earnings.
TikTok is one step closer to being banned in the United States. On Friday, a panel of federal judges unanimously upheld a law that could shut that app down by mid-January. The law requires the company's Chinese owner, ByteDance, to sell the app to a non-Chinese company by January 19th or face a ban in the United States. TikTok has said a sale is impossible, in part because it would be blocked by the Chinese government. TikTok plans to appeal that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. Probably not a coincidence that the day of the deadline is January 19th. Inauguration Day is January 20th, and that probably puts a lot in play, too.
This one's fascinating. Chinese billionaire Jack Ma making a very rare appearance, speaking at an Ant Group's 20th anniversary event. According to Bloomberg, Ma's speech addressed the next 20 years of the fintech company and the opportunities from artificial intelligence. Now, Chinese authorities abruptly halted, if you remember, Ant's IPO back in November 2020, then ordered an overhaul of its business model. The company has reorganized its units and has been expanding its businesses with AI-powered products, both in dining, ride-hailing, entertainment services, healthcare, and finance. And, of course, during that whole period, or after that whole period, Jack Ma effectively went underground, and there's been a lot of questions about why he did so. So to see him pop up like this, and he's popped up a couple more times in the past.
We've seen him, but I haven't heard him speak recently. I think he spoke to maybe a student group at one point, but we haven't heard him speak much on business issues on any of these things.
Exactly.
And it looks like the New York Mets are going to win the Juan Soto sweepstakes. ESPN reports that the Major League Baseball superstars agreed to the largest contract in sports history, $765 million for 15 years with no deferred money. He's 26 years old, and he can opt out following the 2029 season if the Mets don't increase his salary from $51 to $55 million over the last 10 years of the deal. That would put the total value of the contract at over $800 million. Last December, Ohtani signed a 10-year, $700 million contract, and people that have wanted one of the richest guys around to
I was going to say, tie it back to us. He said nobody would outbid him.
Steve Cohen. The Mets had a good year last year and did better than most people thought. This could, he was a game changer for the Yankees. Not enough of a game changer. I don't know what you do at the Yankees. I mean, they made it to,
I know Ohtani played well, but he wasn't the superstar of the World Series either.
Right.
Sometimes big contracts pay off, sometimes they don't.
It'll be fun to watch. I mean, I'm happy that he's staying in
New York.
To watch him every day.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, the stunning end to the al-Assad regime in Syria, fresh reporting from the Middle East, and Council on Foreign Relations President Michael Froman warns that the story in the new Syria is just beginning.
It's not time to break out the champagne. The group that has won, HTS, and its leader, al-Jawlani. HTS has roots in al-Qaeda. Al-Jawlani has a U.S. bounty on his head.
We're back after this. You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC with Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Here's Joe.
Rebels in Syria captured its capital city of Damascus, toppling the Assad regime that has ruled for generations. and ousted President Bashar al-Assad flee the country and has arrived in Moscow, where he and his family have been offered asylum. NBC's Raf Sanchez joins us now with more. Good day, I'll say to you this morning from here, Raf.
Joe, good morning. We are on the Israeli-controlled side of the Golan Heights. We're looking out over southern Syria. Damascus is just over the horizon there. And 48 hours ago, President Bashar al-Assad was in control in the Syrian capital, as his family has been for more than 50 years. But today, as you say, it's a new day in Syria. It is a new day in the Middle East. Assad has fled to Moscow, and it is now a coalition of rebel groups that are in charge in Damascus. The largest of them is an Islamist group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is a group that has its origins in al-Qaeda. It is still considered a terrorist organization by the United States, but it is working very hard to try to show the people of Syria and the world that it is moderated. It says there will be no persecution of minority groups, Christians, Alawites, Shia. It is saying today that there will be no restrictions on women in this new Syria, and it is insisting that it will govern for all Syrians. Now, President Biden saying that this is a moment of risk and opportunity, and that the United States will judge these rebels by their actions, that the U.S. is prepared to engage with them, but at this point is not willing to remove that terrorist designation.
We will engage with all Syrian groups, including within the process led by the United Nations, to establish a transition away from the Assad regime toward independent, sovereign, I want to say it again, sovereign Syria.
I can tell you guys, Israel is not waiting around. They are acting very, very assertively as this new reality takes shape in Syria. Israeli forces have been deploying just over that border into Syria itself. They are saying that that is a temporary measure given the instability there, that they are determined not to let the conflict in Syria spill over into Israeli-controlled territory. And over the weekend, Israel carrying out a series of airstrikes on chemical weapons, biological weapons, ballistic missile sites in Syria that had belonged to the Assad regime. Israel says it is absolutely determined not to allow those strategic weapons to fall into the hands of terror organizations, and that is why it is acting decisively right now. Guys.
Nobody knows, I guess, Raf. The notion that this does turn into some type of theocracy or Islamic republic. In the past, can we, at face value, take what these individuals, what they're saying now at this point about what kind of country they plan on having? Can you take that at face value? It seems like it never plays out that way when push comes to shove.
Yeah, Joe, in some ways, this is kind of an interesting experimental rerun of the Arab Spring from 2011. You know, the uprising against Assad began then peacefully. Assad absolutely crushed it brutally. And here we are 13 years later, and it has led to his overthrow. There are not many positive examples of states in the region where you had these uprisings and it went on to peace, prosperity, stability, and democracy. And the question is, can these Syrian rebels bring anything like that to this country that has been so devastated by 13 years of war, more than 400,000 people killed? I can tell you, Joe, just judging by what they are saying, the rebels are giving indications that they want good relations with their neighbors, with Lebanon, with Jordan, with Turkey. They aren't talking a lot about Israel at this point. Ideologically, these are not groups that are fans of Israel. In some ways, ideologically, they're not a million miles off of Hamas, actually. You have kind of Islamism and nationalism fused together. But their priority at this point seems to be consolidating power inside of Syria, taking over the institutions of the state. And it is worth saying that, this is a group that is different from ISIS. You have American forces still in the eastern half of Syria. They're in an area controlled by Kurdish forces. And those American military operations against ISIS continuing yesterday, even as this political chaos was taking place in the Syrian capital.
It'd be nice if it was the enemy of my enemy, because Iran is certainly losing here, but it's not that simple. But maybe we can hope for some type of Arab Spring moment. Maybe, hope springs eternal, Rob. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Joining us right now, Counsel on Foreign Relations President Michael Froman. He's, of course, former U.S. Trade Representative. I want to thank Michael for joining us this morning. It's great to see you. It has been a wild weekend, or last 72 hours, if not longer than that. Tell us what you think has just happened, but more importantly, tell us what you think it actually means.
Well, that's for sure. It's been an incredible period of time here. First of all, it's a big loss for Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, the three parties who are really propping up the Assad regime, to see how quickly he collapsed, his army collapsed. And it demonstrates their weakened state, their weakened capability of supporting him. And going forward now, Iran cannot really supply Hezbollah through Syria. So Hezbollah is more isolated. Iran loses access to the Mediterranean. Russia has two bases in Syria. It's unclear what the disposition of those bases are. And it's really a reflection of how much Israel has degraded Hezbollah and weakened Iran that has led to, in part, to this, the success of the rebels. Having said that, Andrew, it's not time to break out the champagne. The group that has won, HTS, and its leader, al-Jawlani, HTS has roots in al-Qaeda. Al-Jawlani has a U.S. bounty on his head. He has been sending signals of late that he has distanced himself from that legacy and that he is open to being more tolerant of Syria's various communities, Christian, Druze, Sunni communities. And so he is trying to demonstrate that he shouldn't be a worry to the neighboring parties, but having an Islamist state on the border of Israel and taking over a significant country like Syria is something that all the parties in the region will be looking to and looking at very carefully.
So, Ambassador, what happens to Syria next? But I think the real question, therefore, becomes, if you believe that, for example, Iran is now exposed in some way, how does that change the dynamic in the Middle East as it relates to the United States, as it relates to Israel? I mean, I think that there's so many different cross currents here to this story.
Well, this is certainly a further weakening of Iran right now. They've lost a major ally there. They've lost their capacity to support their proxies in Syria and, of course, Hezbollah in Lebanon as well. So it's a serious weakening there. I think from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. has about 900 troops in Syria, keeping an eye particularly on ISIS. The U.S. is very concerned about the resurgence of ISIS in the context of this vacuum. And you saw that the U.S. struck 75 ISIS targets over the weekend, that Israel struck the chemical weapons capabilities of Syria. So there's still a lot of uncertainty and instability and potential security issues that could arise with all the chaos going on in Syria right now.
And what happens to Syria next, though, itself?
The answer is nobody really knows. I mean, HTS is there in charge. We'll see if it's able to consolidate its powers, being supported, the SNA, the Syrian National Army, being supported by Turkey as well. So it seems to be in the position to establish order there. What kind of order that will be, whether it will be a tolerant society, whether it's going to lead to refugee flows out of Syria, a humanitarian crisis, those are all issues that the U.S. and others are very much focused on. You saw Israel putting troops in the buffer zone between itself and Syria to send the signal that this should not be an opportunity for forces to take advantage of the chaos in the country to pose a risk, further risk to Israel. So it's unclear at this point. I think if we look back, Andrew, at the history of the Arab Spring, countries like Egypt and Tunisia ended up with strongmen. Countries like Libya and Yemen ended up in internal civil wars. So it's very unclear at this point, where things are so dynamic, what the medium or long-term disposition of Syria could be.
So al-Jawlani, if he has a U.S. bounty on his head, what does that mean in terms of how the U.S. officially is going to deal with that group?
Yeah, it's a great question, Becky. It's unclear. I mean, he's certainly sending signals, including in interview he did with CNN recently, that he is a different person than the person who was associated with Al Qaeda and the person that the U.S. put the bounty on the head on. I think we have to look at not just his words, but his deeds, how he treats the people in Syria, whether he is tolerant and allows for a multi-cultural, multi-religious society to exist, and whether he's able to relieve the incredible oppressive regime that Assad had put in place and that the start of the civil war back in 2011.
What do you think this does to the strength of Bibi Netanyahu?
I think this is another indication that the attack on Hezbollah and the weakening of Hezbollah has been successful, has been a positive in terms of Netanyahu's strategy. And if the ceasefire in Lebanon holds, you have a much weakened Hezbollah and now much more isolated from their Iranian supporters. It is probably a positive for him.
Ambassador Froman, you can think of a lot of times when a strongman was taken out, that vacuum of power led to really bad things. Saddam Hussein, nobody wanted Hussein around, but what came afterwards was such chaos and so much awfulness. You can think of Gaddafi. Are there examples where a strongman's been taken out and there was actually a really positive turn of events?
Good question.
It's a very good question. Look, we're not likely to see a Jeffersonian democracy in Syria anytime soon. But each situation is different. Each country is different. And we had the end of the Cold War. You had strongmen taken out of Eastern Europe, and of course that led to, with a lot of outside support, Western integration, led to a much more positive situation.
Ambassador, we're going to leave the conversation there. We very much appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Next on Squawk Pod, the surprising and disturbing reaction across social media to the killing of a United Healthcare executive in Manhattan. The head of the Partnership for New York, Kathy Wylde, on the threats putting the business community on edge.
People who are involved may think this is a game or funny. It's not. This is a real threat to our country's economy.
This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Andrew, Q.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin, along with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick. Hope you all had a great weekend. We got a lot of news this morning.
Now to the latest on the manhunt for the killer of a United Healthcare executive in Manhattan last week. Yesterday, a police scuba team searched the waters of Central Park looking for evidence, including the gun used in the murder of Brian Thompson. Police released 2 new photos of a person of interest, the one that we've all seen, taken this time in a taxi cab via a surveillance system. They now believe he left New York City through a bus station up near the George Washington Bridge. And joining us now, Kathy Wylde, Partnership for New York City president and a CEO. And you could talk the specifics of this case. I don't know how far it gets us if he's gone. I mean, it was only last Wednesday. I'm certain that, and they do call it the long arm of the law for a reason, because it can reach all the way across the globe, the long arm, and it frequently does. So we'll get this guy, but what is the bigger message for business leaders, do you think?
The message is quite frightening, because I have heard of 2 incidents just over the weekend where CEOs have received one anthrax, one a package threatened to be a bomb that had some of the same language about defy and depose.
But was it an insurance executive again?
No, these were other industries, 2 different industries.
What are is it just across the board? I guess it can be, Occupy Wall Street, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but the animus towards business and towards big business and corporations, is it generic or?
I'm afraid it is. I think it's coming from both the far left, far right, the populist movement. Executives are vulnerable, and people call for greater transparency, greater civic engagement, and leadership from the business community. This is pushing it in exactly the opposite direction. Nobody wants to feel this vulnerable, and the actually the immediate reaction to the shooting of Brian Thompson from the internet, from the hate and the hate speech that came out, which always is a precedent to violence. It was almost worse than the killing.
We've seen that social media is basically can be as bad as graffiti because it's anonymous. So maybe, the entire threshold for what's acceptable and what's not has been lowered so much in recent years. But to actually act on it, that's one step beyond. But I was going to say, do you think politicians need to worry? And obviously, there were 2 attempts on President-elect Trump's life already. So when it moves slightly to a different arena, in this case a business executive, it probably shouldn't be surprising. If you're going to try and take out a politician, and then I don't know where it goes from there. No one is safe.
Well, I think your point that about the assassination attempts on the president is very much a precedent, because it actually, I think it does transfer over. And once you've seen that happen, anything goes.
It's like, I'm so mad, I'm justified.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the point here is, I really think President-elect Trump is the only one that can do anything about this level of animus. I think he's got to turn this around. He's very good at messaging to people who feel, we've seen, to people who feel angry and frustrated and left out of the financial success of the country, whatever motivated this. I think he's the only one who can turn this around, and I think we really ought to be asking him to come forward quickly with strong messaging.
Do we need, as the security industry, to start ranking which companies are ripe for this? I would imagine I could see vaccines. I don't want to give anyone an idea.
Happening.
That's already happening. Who is this? It could be generic. Anyone who gets paid $20 million a year, you could be mad at, I guess.
Well, it started, you mentioned, it started in the financial crisis and with the Occupy Wall Street. So it goes back to that. But that was mostly rhetorical, with sometimes, trashing of bank ATM areas, defecating in ATMs, et cetera. There's sort of that. And that started 20 years ago, but it's been a gradual increase. And a lot of it was over fossil fuel use, the environment, on the financial industry.
That, right?
So a lot of it came there. Banks have been that deal with fossil fuel activity have had violent protests. You remember last summer when there were fist fights outside the Citibank.
I was going to say, one of the great things about New York is I've found that most executives, CEOs, billionaires and the like feel very free to walk around this city, oftentimes with no security in their family. And I see all sorts of people. I run into them on the subway, happily. Really. I know people probably don't believe that, but you do. And what I wonder is whether this creates a meaningful chilling effect on that.
Absolutely, this is a chilling effect. This is shocking. At first when it came out, the mayor actually called me and said, that morning, and said, let your people know this was random. This was not random. This was not random. This was a targeted shooting. And that made people feel better for 5 minutes. But then as soon as it came out that it wasn't personal.
Right. We were all hoping it had some kind of family dynamic or something.
Exactly. When it wasn't personal, but it was an attack on somebody because of their job, then all of a sudden it changes everything.
We still don't know exactly what this was. If I was doing a personal attack on somebody, I might try and make it look like this too, but it doesn't matter in the end, because what it has unleashed. I've been shocked following on social media how angry people are, and how, again, they will try and justify what has happened as a result. I didn't know about the 2 other incidents that you mentioned over the weekend. And
they aren't public.
They have not been publicized yet, but we are talking about additional actions that have taken place towards corporate leaders here in New York City that look like copycat type of issues.
Yes, and and institutions. I was with a bunch of leaders last week on Friday morning, and they had to turn off their social media channels because they're being deluged with threats. So this is no. I mean, people who are involved may think this is a game or funny. It's not. This is a real threat to our country's economy.
We've seen insurance companies in particular remove their executives' profiles and pictures from the websites. Are
Correct.
Other companies, other industries doing similar things?
Yes, across the board, it's very serious, being taken very seriously in every industry. There is an angle by which one can get mad at any company.
Right.
Right. So do you think that security firms are like, I'd like to help you, but we're already totally committed? I bet you that's happening, wouldn't you think?
I think
hiring people.
I think security firms and consultants are hiring up. Yes,
hiring
I think,
up.
Yeah, and I think that the additional burden on law enforcement is another piece we have to think about, because law enforcement has been under pressure, but they've seen great attrition in their ranks because of the defund the police movement and negativity about law enforcement. All of a sudden, the need to reverse that course and up our support from law enforcement is really serious.
I've seen also postings again on social media, people calling for a return to a Giuliani-style era or a Bill Bratton, no broken windows. Do you agree that that's something that we should be pushing for, or are there other answers?
Well, I think we have to start with the hate, and that, and most recently it's been anti-Semitism that we've seen take a great jump. So I think that I heard somebody from a foundation describe this as the decline of our civil institutions and our churches, and our, that we just don't. We are normalizing behavior that we used to have institutions that taught us was improper. So it's scary. I even was with a city council member on Friday who said her office is flooded with hate mail. Hate email and fears. If I speak out in support of a position or a politician, I supported congestion pricing, for example.
I will get an area where
yes, exactly. I will get hate mail.
See that crazy lady with the.
I will get anonymous hate mail.
This is a lesson for all of us, that we have to be much more civilized in how we approach things.
Totally.
I disagreed with you on that idea, but I hope that we didn't spark things that sent people after you. That's crazy.
No, it was happening before you.
That's horrible. We can all have differences of opinions.
But it is amazing what people feel free to say to us or to anyone. Even they get your email, they say stuff, and it's like, we're complete strangers. Why do you think it's okay to say?
Even on social media, sometimes these are verified people, and it's their actual account.
And it's shocking.
Who they are.
It is shocking.
Well,
so I send back something even more shocking.
It's translated into a real, what constitutes a real threat. And we have to dial it back. And again, I think
unfortunately, that would be the next step. I didn't know that it was actually that the next step was going to be taken, but it looks like we're in the process of where that's.
Yeah, and I think the only one who can really change this tone, it's got to start from the top. And I think President-elect Trump, as somebody who's been a victim of an assassination attempt, is in a very good position to use the power that he has to change this. I haven't heard that he's spoken on this yet. And I have heard that he has spoken with the family and the company. But now I really think it's time for him to go public.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's Squawk Pod for today. Thanks for listening, and thanks for starting your week with us. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern. Get the smartest takes and analysis and interviews from our TV show right into your ears when you follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, let us know. Rate or review Squawk Pod on Apple Podcasts. Reach out to us on X at Squawk CNBC. We love hearing from you. Have a great Monday, and we'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.